Let me welcome all of you to Chat with Matt. My goal on Chat with Matt is to find people who have something interesting to say that's relevant to job search. And asking for favors is probably one of our core values. As I was explaining to our guest speaker, Michael Roderick, one of the most important things that you do in your search is asking for help. And it can be a problematic thing, asking people for their help. The reciprocity is a key element to it, and Michael's going to be discussing that with us. As many of you may know, within the FENG, we run a free market in favors. So anybody that you call on any given day and ask for a favor, you are welcome to pay that back to anybody else who comes along. Oftentimes, it's very hard to pay favors back to the specific person who gave you the favor. Michael's going to be addressing some of that stuff too. But first, I've asked him to introduce himself, and I'm going to add him right now as a spotlight, and he is hopefully he'll be on your screen, worst case, when he starts speaking. So, Michael, why don't you kick us off here by telling us who the heck you are and how you got yourself into this mess.
Sure. So I started out actually as a high school English teacher, and I went from being a high school English teacher to becoming a Broadway producer in under 2 years. So a lot of people were very curious as to sort of how I had moved so quickly. And I was getting my master's in educational theater at NYU, and I had learned about the power of simulations. And when you basically have people act out scenarios, in many cases, they basically do what they would do in real life, even though they know they're acting. So I started hosting workshops where I would simulate those networking experiences. I'd have people act out things like one-on-one meetings, job interviews, and cocktail parties.
Oh.
And what I started to notice was patterns in terms of how people interacted. And based on those patterns, I started to develop frameworks and relationship building frameworks. And the more that I started teaching these things and started putting these things out there, I started to realize that the reason why I was getting all the introductions I was getting was the fact that people were always talking about me when I wasn't in the room in a good way. So I really started to focus on that aspect of referability and really thinking about how do you get to that place where people are sharing your ideas, talking, introducing you to people, helping you, sort of connecting you. And that's the rabbit hole that I've been down for the past, 10, 12 years.
Nice. So you're building a new practice in referability, I believe?
Yes, indeed.
Why don't you explain what that is? And then
Sure. So referability is the aspect of how do you make it so that other people will share your ideas even if you are not there. So it really comes down to how are you packaging those concepts, those services, those things that you have to offer. So it's much more likely that people will remember you, remember those services, those types of things, and talk to others when you're not there. And where this kind of shows up the most is in the thought leadership space. So usually when people are subject matter experts, they don't take the time to package their ideas. So that's the work that I've started to do, is helping people package those ideas.
Oh, okay. I know when I've been out and about networking, I tell people I find chief financial officers and controllers for middle market companies. I have something very simple that aids in my referability. And to your point about not being in the room, I make it very easy for me to be referred to other people because I have something brief to explain to them.
Exactly. Exactly.
Part of it is along the lines of the magic rule of threes. You can't tell people too many things because otherwise, if you tell them more than 3 things, they forget all of them.
Yes.
So maybe you want to 100%. Tie that into the referability issue for us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately, when we think about referability, it comes down to 3 main principles, which are accessibility, influence, and memory. So the first aspect is, can people outside of your industry actually understand what you're talking about? That's the first hurdle that you always have. Influence is all about, are people going to talk about you or share your ideas without you asking them to do it? And the only way you get people to do that is if it makes them look good when they talk about you to somebody else, right? So you've always got to think about, how am I packaging this? How am I presenting this in such a way that if somebody else were to share it with somebody else, they'd look good. They'd be the one who looked interesting and fascinating. And then finally, even if you've got accessibility and influence down, if it's not easy to remember, if we can't hold it in our brain and then transfer it and share it with somebody else, then it's not going to get shared. And I often tell people, we spend so much time thinking about this idea of, I want to be able to tell this really great story, but we don't spend nearly enough time thinking about, how am I going to make sure that people are able to retell the story that I've created.
Right. This is exactly why we got into our last conversation.
Yep.
That is exactly the problem. And I was talking about it just a minute ago. If I meet you, I like you, and I would like to introduce you to other people, but I need a handle. And then that handle, then I can tell part of the story that you told me. But if I don't have the handle, I don't even know how to get started.
Exactly.
Something really complicated, I don't know how to get started.
Yep. Yeah. And a lot of the time, the reason why we don't share things, and often the reason why we don't refer somebody, is because we feel awkward trying to explain what that person does or what that person helps with. So we start to feel, oh, this feels strange. So then we just don't do it.
Yes, right. Right. If you don't know how to get started, right? Like the piano teacher, the 5 easy pieces, right?
Yep.
If you don't know how to get started, how are you going to refer somebody?
Exactly.
This kind of also comes up during interviewing, for example. If you have a day where you're interviewing with 5 people at the same company, each of the people has to bring you into the next office, and they have to have something to say.
Yeah, 100%.
Something brief. And then when they talk about you later, they have to have some handle, because they might be interviewing 10 people. That you have to have a brand.
Yes, exactly.
So all these issues come up. Why don't we backtrack for a second, and why don't you define what you mean by the giver's fix?
Sure. So basically, when we do something for somebody else, there is a chemical reaction that happens in the body. Now, some will say it's oxytocin, some say it's dopamine. Regardless of what chemical we decide it is, there is a rush that we get when we give. And what can happen is that we can actually get hooked on that rush, much like an addict gets hooked on that good feeling. So if we're going around helping and doing things for other people, we're getting that good feeling. But just like the addict, we're plateauing every time it happens. And we're like, I need a better rush. I need a bigger rush. I need a bigger rush. And what ends up happening is we start to give so much that it's at the detriment of ourselves. We start to basically get to this point where we're so hooked on the giving and sort of helping everybody else out that we're not paying attention to what it is that we need and what it is that we're looking for. And then we become really worried about asking. We start to get really concerned about asking. We start to get a lot of anxiety about asking because we're not getting the same chemical reaction that we get when we give.
Interesting. One of the things I always tell people when they're out and about networking, right? Our mantra in the FENG is there's only 3 ways to find a job: networking, and more networking.
Yeah.
So the hesitation of people is to, they're calling up the Godfather, so to speak, and asking for a favor. And the fear is that they won't be able to pay back the person who asked, who they asked. So within our networking group, of course, you can pay your favors back to anybody. Takes a little bit of the stress out of it.
Yeah.
I was fascinated by your position that the giver sometimes ends up with nothing. You just don't know what to ask for or how to ask. They feel
Yes.
people are just asking them for a favor, and they feel, do they feel reluctant to ask for a favor when someone's asking them for a favor?
I mean, I think that it's more along the lines of because there's no chemical reaction to the asking, because there's no reward on the other end of the asking. Basically, that's the thing that gets put off, right? We basically like just kind of like put it to the side and we don't think about it. And then we often sort of see the asking as we're taking something away from the other person. Like we feel like we're putting somebody in a disposition, in a bad position if we're asking them for something. But what is really fascinating is that you're getting that good rush
Mhm.
when you're giving and sort of helping. So if you're not letting somebody else know what it is that you need help with, then they're not getting the opportunity to give to you or to help you or to support you. So you're actually hogging all of that oxytocin and good feeling for yourself. So even though you're doing all of this giving, it's actually you being selfish, because you're just holding on to all of that and you're not letting anybody know what they could do to help you and support you. So you're not even giving them the opportunity to feel good.
Is it possible that many of the people who are asking you for favors have nothing to give you?
So I think that's probably the most interesting statement,
Mhm.
because we get into this place of thinking, if somebody is at maybe a higher level, then if we ask them for something, what could we possibly return? Like what could we
Yes.
possibly give back to them? And the interesting thing about this is we actually don't know. So we have our own assumptions about the value that we can provide. And until we actually ask them what they could use support with, where they could use help, we don't know if we have something that could be really useful to them. So if we're reaching out to somebody, we're saying, can you make this intro, to this person? Because I'm trying to, find this job opportunity.
Mhm.
And they say yes. And then we say, what is it that you could use help with right now, or sort of where are you at right now? They might say something that has nothing to do with their career or their business. They might say, well, my kid is really trying to get into this school, and they
Oh.
name the school, and then you're like, oh, my cousin knows the dean there. Or
Mhm.
no, like, you never know. And I think that the mistake that we make when we are in a position of need is that we believe that we don't have as much value as the people that we're going to and asking for things from. And that's
Mhm.
just not true. You can help anyone if you ask enough questions.
Ah, okay. So that certainly is a problem. When someone is calling you up and asking you for a favor, they have a very clear idea in their mind what the favor is.
Yep,
But when they're talking to you, they have no idea what you want.
exactly.
So
Exactly.
I think you should talk to us about how you set yourself up to ask the right questions to draw out a favor from other people.
Yeah. So I think you really want to get a sense of where somebody is and what they're trying to accomplish. And most of the time, we don't ask that question. We don't ask what is on the horizon for them and what are they looking for? What are they on the lookout for? What would be helpful or sort of supportive to them? We don't take the time to really ask that, right? Or sort of understand, that particular piece. And a lot of the time, I call this asking blinders. So when you're in a really high state of asking anxiety,
Yeah,
you stop paying attention to the other person.
for
So
sure.
they'll be talking to you about like who they are and what they're about, and giving you all this like really great information about like the things that they need and that they're looking for, but you don't even hear it because all you're thinking is, I need this person to do this favor for me. Right?
Right. Yeah.
So the thing that we need to do in those scenarios is always take a second to ask them about what's their focus at this point. What are they working on? What are they doing? And where are the gaps? What are the challenges? What are the issues that are coming up? Because we never know what we could potentially do to help that person out.
Right. But what, when you're asking somebody for favors, when you say the words, what can I do for you? It's almost a throwaway line.
Yes.
Maybe that's not the
Yes.
right question.
Exactly. And the thing is, if you're listening, you will never have to ask that question, because you will get all sorts of ideas as to what you could potentially help them with. If you just ask them a little bit about themselves, you're going to get ideas and thoughts that are going to come up and be like, oh, well, you mentioned that you really love golf. I know of this really great place, that you could, would you want to check it out? Like you're going to get all sorts of ideas as to sort of how to support somebody. And I think that the mistake that we make is that we almost always see support as binary, right? We almost always see it as like, I'm going to just do this one thing, or I'm going to do, and you never know like which area this person could use support, right? So it could be that they're looking for, it could be that they're looking for advice, and it could be that something, or you've learned something that can help them in their life. There may be something personal going on that we've never, that they haven't had a chance to talk about. There's so many ways.
Perhaps something not obvious.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, well, we always tell people when they're networking to do a little research on the person they're calling.
Yep.
And I think, generally speaking, people don't know how much information there is out there about them.
Yeah, that's so much.
You can't really find out a lot of things about people before you call them.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But I think what you're suggesting here is you really have, my wife would tell me, you have to be an active listener.
Yes.
When you're talking to people, you really have to be paying, you get so busy with your own agenda, because let's face it, if you're out of work, you're really in a desperate situation, right? You've got no income coming in, and you don't know how you're going to solve this. And financial people, generally speaking, are not, they're not extroverts, right? So they're not talkative, they're not backslappers, they're not any of these things. So it's very hard to get beyond your stress of asking for a favor. And of course, as financial people, most of the time in life, people are asking you for favors all the time. Sign this check, give me more budget money. It's a very uncomfortable situation asking other people for favors, right? Just for starters. And then to put yourself past that and to be actively listening. Maybe you can go over this a bit. Actively listening for how you can help the person that you're calling. Granted, we have this thing, right, where you can pay your favor back to anyone else, but it'd be really nice to come up with some ideas on how to draw out from the person you're asking for the favor what you can do for them.
So there's so much to sort of unpack within that idea. But the first thing that I think is really important is that the enemy of active listening is living in the past or living in the future. And when you're in the heightened state of anxiety, those are the two places where you live. You either are listening to that person and thinking, oh man, I screwed up that thing that I said 5 minutes ago, and I don't know, and then you're in your own head and you're not hearing anything that they're saying, or you're thinking, oh my God, if this person doesn't say yes at the end of this conversation, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay rent or whatever, and you're living in the future, right? So the key is living in the present, is actually being able to be active listening within the present. Now, the thing that happens is that most of the time, to talk to your point about, well, how do you kind of get more info, in that conversation? Well, the thing is, most of the time when we're having conversations with people, we live in the professional. And you have this like meeting or this conversation, and it's very, very often only talking about professional things sort of back and forth.
Oh, okay.
Right. And there's other layers to this. So beyond the professional is the personal. And there are always personal elements of people's lives. Now, you don't have to get hyper, personal of, like uncomfortably so, but talking to somebody about where they live, talking to somebody about the TV shows that they enjoy, talking to somebody about, kids and like those types of things, it changes the dynamic. All of a sudden, I don't feel like I'm just here in this sort of transactional back and forth. I feel like I'm getting to know you, right? So now, if I go from professional then to personal, then I can go even deeper with you if we're getting that rapport, and I can go into inspirational. I can actually ask you why you're doing what you're doing, because most people ask what you do. Very, very few people ask you why you do it.
Oh, okay.
Right.
That's good.
And you will light up often when you talk about why you do what you do, why it's exciting to you, why it's inspiring to you, why you're passionate about your work or whatever the scenario is. So now, once we've gotten to that point where somebody's really kind of opening up, well, now we can go into the aspirational, which is where do they want to go next? Right? We can start, we've opened that door. If we start with, how can I help you? Or what are you looking for? Or, all of those different types of things, it kind of pushes people back, right? And they're kind of freaked out by it because they're like, I don't know you. But if we go these layers, right? We start professional, we talk about personal, we talk about inspirational, we talk about aspirational, and we get that level of trust. Most often, you'll be able to go to that last layer, which is the problematic. And that is the actual thing that they're struggling with, or that they're dealing with, or the thing that they could use help with or support with. Most people will not open with that. Most people will not open with vulnerability. But if they get to know you and you're having a good conversation and you're hitting all these levels, a lot of people open up. And I can't tell you the number of times I've gotten to sort of the end of the conversation, and I've even said to somebody, I've said, it sounds like everything is going so well for you. It sounds like you're doing, things are going fantastic. I'm just curious, is there anything that's not? Is there anything that you feel that, could be better or is frustrating? And most of the time, they'll tell me. And if they tell me, that gives me all the clues I need to figure out how I could support them, because I can make an intro, I could suggest a resource to them, I could suggest a book. There's so many things that I can do once I've heard that thing that they're thinking a lot about and that they're struggling with.
No, the whole process of communication is getting people to drop the heat shield that they put up when they're meeting somebody for the first time.
Exactly.
I don't know whether I really am going to like you. I don't know. I don't want to tell you too much before I know that I want to be a friend of yours.
Yep.
So, people, especially in interviewing, you start out with, how was the traffic? Did you want a cup of coffee? It's important to be looking around people's offices, and on Zoom, we can see a little bit of background of what people are about.
Yeah.
Pick up on those clues, right? And then once if you can come up with some questions, if you know somebody, right, you get a sense of their LinkedIn profile. Maybe they have a picture. Our previous guest speaker, for example, was talking to us about private equity, but he's a pilot. He's a private equity guy, but he's a pilot, so he has one of his things is faster landings, right? I don't remember who introduced the two of us, but one of our speakers was a boxer. So he does knockout networking. It's all about boxing. It's important to pick up on these little clues so that you can have a human conversation with another person.
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's like, we're all people at the end of this. And the mistake that gets made is that we're not treating people like people when we're in that heightened state of anxiety and asking, right? We're treating them like meal tickets. We're treating them like, vending machines. And the second the way I like to think about it is that you cannot underestimate the significance of making someone else feel significant,
Right.
right?
Yes.
So the more that you take the time to have them feel, wow, you're really listening to me, you're really paying attention, you actually care about what's going on with me, the better the relationships are. And and the thing is, if you are reaching out to somebody for a favor, or you're on a job search, you don't
Yeah.
want that person to only think of you once. You want them to think of you multiple times. You want them to stay in touch. You want to have an actual relationship with the people that you're connecting with. So the more that you take the time to do that and really dig in and care and
Mhm.
take, and support the folks that you're talking to, the more they're going to think of you, the more top of mind you're going to be.
Yeah. I think since the group is mostly men, right?
Mhm.
Being vulnerable is a no-no.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous. The only way I can personally really help somebody is if they're totally honest with me.
Yep.
Um,
Exactly.
I've had people who have told me over the years that, I look at their resumes and they've got a big gap in their resume, and there's no explanation. And
Yeah.
some of the women in our group, for example, have taken time out of their careers to take care of parents.
Sure.
I mean, just stopped working and taking care of their parent. Well, I personally like people who like other people.
Yeah.
That's a positive. And I said, I would put it on your resume.
Yep.
And I had one person who did that, and the next week they got an interview.
There you go.
They'd left an open question, and they hadn't allowed themselves to drop the veil and
Yeah.
explain. And I think being honest with the people you're talking to, not pathetically honest. We don't want to go that far, right?
Sure.
But
Yeah.
if you explain your life a bit, people then jump in and help you because you're a real person.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the thing. We all naturally have a desire to help each other and support each other in some way, but very often we're not let in on what the people around us really need or want or are looking for. So it's up to us to be proactive about that and have those conversations and really try to see the world through the eyes of the people that you're talking to. I'm always thinking, as I'm talking to people and they're sharing with me a challenge or something that they're working through, I'm
Yeah.
out in the world and looking around and thinking, okay, well, who would it be good for them to know, and what would be helpful to them, and what would be supportive of their ventures.
Yeah. So I know you're deep into this kind of stuff, and you have some structure that you'd like to
Yes.
explain to us. So why don't you do that? Because
Sure.
the one of the things that I say is that uh, in math class, right?
Hmm.
You get more points for setting up the problem correctly than getting the right answer, because the right
Yes.
answer is one number.
Yes.
So setting up the problem is key. So why don't
Yeah.
you walk us through your
Sure.
structure so
Yeah.
we'll thoroughly understand it.
Yeah, so basically there's two main things to really be thinking about. And the first is actually having flow within your network. So the reason why a lot of people's networks have challenges is because there isn't any flow. They're either running around, if they're in the giver's fix, they're running around always giving to people and they're never taking care of themselves. And everybody in their network's frustrated with them because they're like, how do I help you? I don't know, like, you're doing all this stuff for me and now I feel like I have all this debt because you've done all this stuff for me, like, but you're
Oh,
not telling me how to help you, right? So they're educating their network in a very, very different way, right? And the thing is, like, anytime that you run around giving all the time and you don't let people know what it is that you need, you're educating your network to believe that you have no needs. That's
oh,
just that's just how it works, right? But the other side of all of this is, if you are always asking,
mhm.
if you're just constantly asking and you're going to people and you're asking, then what ends up happening is you start to be seen as that person, right, who only shows up when they're asking,
Right.
right?
The,
So the
the,
key,
But as I say, life
Yeah.
is a give and take. You give and I take.
Yeah. So yeah, so the key is to create a balance. And the way that I like to think about this balance is I call it the gate strategy. So every day you open and close the gate. Every day you make it a choice that you're going to give without expectation of return. And the most important thing to understand about a gift is that there is no expectation of return. If there is expectation of return, it's a transaction. It's not a gift, right?
Okay. Okay.
So every day you make it a point to give. You help somebody, you support somebody, you do something. But every single day, you also make it a point to ask and
Oh,
let
okay.
folks know what it is that you're looking for. Let folks know what it is that you could use support with, what it is that you're on the lookout for. And it doesn't have to be with the person that you gave to. You know, if they ask you, fine, but it doesn't have to be that. You don't have to make it that binary. You can literally go and help somebody else, you know, and if they ask you, you can tell them, but if they don't ask you, you can keep going. And then go out and ask and let folks know what it is you're looking for, what it is that you could use help with. And then giving and asking, that balance is really, really powerful, but it's even more powerful when you add thanking into the mix.
Okay.
Because how often do you do something for somebody and never hear a thank you?
Yes. Right.
It's incredible how often we are not thanked. So if every day you make it a point to ask yourself, who have I not thanked? You're going to shock yourself because you interact with lots of people help you, lots of people do things, and we just forget, right? Like we forget about it.
I would share with you that one of the problems with people who are asking for favors is they're afraid to even call you up and thank you because they're afraid it will be viewed as another ask.
Yeah. Yep. That makes perfect sense. You know, that makes perfect sense. And the thing is, if somebody is worried about the idea of a call as a thank you, send a card, send them an email that basically just says, I really appreciate the fact that you took the time to do that, and like lay out for them what it is that they did for you and what it meant. That, like, most people do not, they either say thanks, right? Or they they make it a throwaway. Tell somebody how much what happened meant to you and what the results were, what the experience was, because they will feel much, much better about it. And you're going to be more top of mind, because I can guarantee you most of the other people that they talk to are not saying thank you.
Yeah. One of my discoveries is that you need to, if you call somebody up and they give you some referrals, if you don't report back to them about the referrals, you're actually missing out. It's I would build on your point that very few people actually say thank you.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, I came up with 3 people for you to talk to, and I gave you those 3 names. And I try, when I give introductions, I try to give full contact information. I don't want to make it difficult for the person to solve the contact issue.
Sure.
But if you don't call me back and tell me, at the moment I hung up the phone, I thought of 3 other people to connect you with. But then the phone rang and I got 5 emails and my boss walked into the office and so forth. It's fine. So if you don't call me back, those other people that I thought of after our conversation, because I enjoyed meeting you, I wanted to help you, so forth and so on, you miss out on all of those.
Yeah.
It's not just the element, in my mind, it's not just the element that you want to say thank you and that makes people remember you.
Yeah.
But it's also that you're missing out.
Yeah. 100%. You're so right. And you see that all the time where that thank you comes in and you're like, oh yeah, and I thought of other people for you. Like, it's just, it's so powerful and so effective. And then the final piece that, again, doesn't happen a lot is experimenting, right? Where you're basically like looking at, well, what am I currently doing with my network? What are the things that and then testing new things and basically being like, okay, well, I've been doing coffee meetings for X number of, weeks. I'm going to try taking one of these meetings at the park instead.
Mhm.
I've been reaching out to people via email. I'm going to try reaching out to them via LinkedIn for a little while, and you test different things, and you're basically like, okay, I'm going to try these things out. And then
Oh, okay.
if you reflect on that, you can start to figure out which things are really working for you and which things are not. And you can build that experiment piece into everything that you're doing. So like you can start to look at, okay, when I give to these people, what kind of reaction do I get versus when I give to these people? When I ask this type of person for
Mhm.
this thing, what reaction? And you can really start to be more of a scientist in it, right? Study the things that you're learning, use that data, and start to optimize your process. And the mistake that I see so many people make when it comes to things like job searching, reaching out, is that they find a process, they find a way that somebody has told them to do something, and they never experiment with that process. They
Right.
never test a new way of doing it or trying it. And they're missing out on potentially a whole different channel that they could approach or a way that they could do things. They're missing out on finding the thing that actually really resonates with them and really works for them. So if every
Yep.
day you're making it a point to open and close that gate, every day you're giving, you're asking, you're thanking, you're experimenting, and every day you're reflecting on those things.
Yeah. And an interesting fact is that we have so many communication vehicles today
Hmm.
that we didn't have 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and they change over time. The example I would share with you, you and I are both old enough, I guess, to remember when, oh, you've got mail. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm old enough to remember, you got a fax. You got a fax.
Yeah.
You get so excited if you got a fax, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to really get somebody's attention, maybe you send them a FedEx, right? Or
Yeah.
overnight FedEx. Of course, we don't do that anymore. So, as we've gone, I have a search practice, and when I need to reach somebody, I need to reach them. So,
Yeah.
it used to be that you could call somebody and they would pick up their phone. No, that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. Exactly.
Or you
Exactly.
send them an email, right? And they would check their email all the time.
Yeah.
And of course, we have texting. So I mentioned this private equity group friend of mine. He was I wanted to reach him to schedule a sound and light check, and so I sent him an email, nothing. I sent him I called him, nothing. I sent him a text message, nothing. It turns out he gets like hundreds of text messages a day. Because
Yeah.
it used to be, right, that a text message would pop up on your phone and boom, people will call you immediately. Well,
Yeah.
they found out that works. So all of a sudden they're texting you constant. These people who are connected, they're not getting hundreds of emails anymore. They're getting hundreds of text messages a day, and you can't read all of them. Let
Yeah.
alone, back other than uh, getting back to people through text message, I find very painful.
Yeah.
No, really, and
Yeah.
it's just for the reason that I type 90 words a minute. So email, I can blast out responses all day long.
Yep.
Texting, I'm not into that thumbs thing where you
Yeah.
go back and forth.
Yep.
I would tell you, in the world of communication, you were saying about experimenting. A lot of people will send you LinkedIn invitations, right? And LinkedIn messages. I
Yeah.
personally find them very annoying. These are
Yeah.
people who have my email address, and there's no record of the text message or the LinkedIn thing that I can print out as a reminder.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like email. If you're going to send me a message that I need to respond to, I'd rather it came by email. Otherwise, I have to go on to LinkedIn, see what you said, then write you
Yeah.
a response. LinkedIn doesn't have an outgoing signature, which everybody in this assembled group knows I beat the drum about all the time. It gets very complicated.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you want
And
to experiment with different methods, and yeah, some people sending them a LinkedIn invitation to start the conversation is very smart.
yep. exactly.
But if you know their email address, I would lean towards email addresses. I don't know
Yeah.
if your experiments have been working. Maybe you want
Yeah.
to talk
Well,
about that for a few minutes.
yeah, I mean, what I have found is that you basically pay attention to different people's communication channel and then you focus on that channel. So like there are some people
Okay.
who they are way more LinkedIn focused. So like you can't get them on email because they're always, they're always on that platform. And then there are some people who email is their jam. And then there are some people who phone is their thing. So
Yeah.
really it's about having a conversation with somebody about what is the best communication channel for you. And that's a great question you can ask, especially if you're having a conversation with somebody from a job search standpoint or something. Like basically, what's the best communication channel? Because for a lot of people, they like they are overwhelmed on certain channels and they don't answer them. They don't, and then people think, oh, well, that person didn't get back to me. But it's like, no, they don't answer email, or they don't answer their phone, or they don't answer any messages on this platform or that platform. So I often find that the best thing is to basically
Yeah.
talk to people about what's your channel and then figure out, okay, what's the best way to follow up using that particular channel.
No, it's you're absolutely right. It's very important to keep track of how people would prefer you communicate with them.
Exactly.
One of
Exactly.
my recommendations to people who are out marketing themselves is they need a contact database package of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
You can keep good notes, and Excel doesn't allow you to do that. You need a kind of a flat file structure, and part of your notes is how people want to hear from you.
Yeah,
You really want to keep
exactly.
track of that.
Yeah, so important. So
We're
important.
down into the last 15 minutes. I just want to make sure
Yeah.
that all of the structures that
Yeah.
you have created, that you've had an opportunity to present them to us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So why don't we go on
4 ways
to.
to think about asking is what I'm.
Yeah, I think that's the
referring to.
best place to go. So so basically asking is often only seen in one way. Like we're almost always sort of told, like, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Right.
And basically that lends itself to
Michael,
one.
you should really repeat that. If you
Yeah.
don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah, it is true.
That's a core value.
Yes. And the thing is, when we hear that, we often go to one form of asking, and that is the direct ask, right?
Okay.
So very often we ask people directly for things. We say, hey, can you make this intro for me? Hey, can you do this thing for me? Hey, can you invest in my company? Whatever it is, right? And if we're just meeting somebody for the first time, what that's doing is it's triggering the fight or flight response in the brain. Because if I don't know you and you're reaching out and you're asking me directly for something, I'm kind of weirded out by that, right? Like I have a concern, about that. And I learned this in Broadway, right? Because when I was raising money for Broadway shows, I never ever got an investment by asking somebody if they would invest. That was not the way that I did it. What I did was I did the second form of asking, which is the indirect.
Okay.
Now, indirect asking is when you present the problem to the other person that you're dealing with, and then you invite them to be a thought partner in helping you solve that problem. So in Broadway, this is what I did. I would go to an investor and I would say, I'm new to the industry. I'm just kind of getting to, getting to learn sort of what the story is. I've got this show. You've invested in shows before. Would you be open to giving me your feedback on whether or not you think this show is investable?
Oh, wow. Okay.
So what would they do? They would then look at it. They would start talking to me about it. And in many cases, they'd say, well, you know what? I'd like to invest in this. Right. And any time that you create that environment of letting somebody else be a thought partner, you're going to get a much better response because the brain is going to a creative place. When we're doing a direct ask, the brain has to say in fight or flight. So it's yes or no. And we limit the things we get in life when we limit other people's creativity. So if you say to somebody, this is what the problem that I'm trying to solve, do you have any ideas? Do you have any thoughts about this? They may come up with something that you didn't think that you needed.
Right.
And especially with introductions, I can't tell you the number of times when I reach out to people for introductions, I never say, hey, can you introduce me to so-and-so?
Mm-hmm.
I say, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. I see that you're connected to this person and you know them. What would you consider to be the best way to reach out to them? And what happens? They either make the intro themselves or they give me the intel as to how I'm supposed to connect with that person. Or they say, you know what? That's not the person you need the intro to. They're
Oh,
actually not the person who's doing the hiring or doing the, or bringing on the speaker, et cetera. You need to talk to this person instead.
yeah.
So
One
the
thing I would put
indirect,
in here is people should keep in mind, there's no greater honor than asking somebody for their advice.
yep, exactly. Exactly. And that's what that indirect does. But then you can go even further and you can get a lot more with the M. So this spells the word dime when you're thinking about these 4 ways of thinking about asking. So it's easy to remember. The M is for mutually beneficial.
Uh-huh.
And again, most of the time when people ask, they don't paint the picture of how both parties are going to benefit.
Uh-huh.
But
Okay.
if you do, then you are going to get a much more favorable response. This happens all the time in sponsorships where people are like, well, you look at the sponsorship deck rather than saying, I've researched your company. It looks like this is your ideal client. And it looks like the lifetime value of that client is $300,000 or something of that nature. I'm hosting an event that's going to have 500 of these people, and I'm putting together a sponsorship. And basically you'll be able to sit on a panel, you'll be able to show your expertise, you'll be able to give them something where you can get their email addresses,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm charging $5,000 for the sponsorship.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how much easier it is to make that decision than, hey, will you look at the deck?
For
Right?
sure. Yeah.
And then the final one, and this is probably the most powerful one because this actually goes back to the asking anxiety and all the issues that people have, is the extraordinary ask. And in the extraordinary ask, this is the ask that you ask yourself. You basically ask yourself, who am I afraid to reach out to? Who do I think is completely out of my league? What are what are the things that I'm avoiding? So let's say you read a book or something and you really loved what the author said. Most people join what I call the longest line, where basically they read that book, they say that author's too busy, I'm never going to reach out to them, and then they join the longest line of all the people who made that same decision. Only a handful of people make the extraordinary ask and actually do reach out to that author and say, hey, I loved what you put out there. Now, here's what's so interesting about influential people. Most influential people are always approached with a direct ask.
Oh, okay.
Right? People are always coming to them making a direct ask. So if you have an indirect ask, if you ask a really interesting question and you just kind of open up that thread, you're already seen as different. If you come with a mutually beneficial ask in a way that you can see you can support them and help them when you reach out to them, you're seen in a completely different light than all of the people who are coming to them and asking for the same thing. Right? So it's a very, very different dynamic if somebody goes and says, hey, can I take you out for coffee and pick your brain?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And somebody who says, hey, I noticed that you have all of this expertise, I'm putting together a panel, I would love and be honored for you to be on that panel and share some of your expertise with this audience that I've put together.
Yeah. Just to your point, since I know you live in the New York City area, Joe Conley, who's on WCBS every morning.
Yep.
He lives in Connecticut, and he's always he's been at many events that I've attended. And I don't know that he knows me, but he knows me.
Yeah.
He doesn't know who I am necessarily, but I've met him several times, and I always talk to him like a person.
Yeah.
And I was at an event with him once, and I asked him how he decided what he was going to talk about in the morning. And he looked at me dumbstruck. No one had ever asked him that question.
There
So
you go.
he says, I don't know how to answer that. So he walked away, and then like 10 minutes later, he caught up to me at this event, and he said, I've been thinking about your question.
Yep. That's the thing.
I didn't ask him for anything in particular, or I didn't do a direct ask. I
Yeah.
asked about him.
Yes. Yeah. And the other thing that you created was curiosity, right?
Yeah.
And anytime that you create curiosity, you're way more likely to get a response. The mistake that most people make when they're reaching out to people in the hopes of a response is that they never create any curiosity. They basically give everybody all the information, so there's nothing to ask there's no question to ask, right? Like there's nothing that they're curious about. But the second you make people curious, they're like, oh my God, I need to talk to you, right? Like I need to have more of those conversations.
There's a belief that famous people are unapproachable, and it's not true.
Yeah. Oh,
Some of them
100%.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat box already, and we
Sure.
have 5 more minutes at least. Maybe we can indulge you to stay. We can do a direct ask and ask you to stay maybe 5 more minutes. But one of the questions is, can you tell us something about your podcast and what you think is the most counterintuitive technique, your advice to connect with targeted strangers?
Sure. So my podcast is called Access to Anyone. I've had it since 2015. And basically I talk to people from all different walks of life. And at the end of every episode, I ask them if they could have access to anyone. They get a chance to sit down with anyone they like. They have to be living. Who would that one person be? And I get lots of really fascinating answers, to that question, and meet lots of really interesting people, sort of as a result of that. In regards to the counterintuitive, I mean, there's lots of different things that are very that I think are counterintuitive. I think probably the biggest one is that most of the time when people are thinking about influential people, they think that those people are going to be open to trading their time, and they are far more open to leveraging their time. So basically, like somebody at a higher level, they usually don't take a one-to-one, but they do an interview, or they come on a panel, or they go to a conference. So anytime that you're trying to reach somebody influential, the thing that you want to do is you want to think about what is a leveraged activity. How do I get them to come to something where they can see that there's more of a benefit for them? And I've done this numerous times where people who normally would say no to meeting or having a one-to-one would be happy to come to a dinner with, this, New York Times best-selling author, or this investor, or this Broadway producer, or whatever the scenario is.
Well, my asking you to be on my chat with Matt is a leveraged activity for you.
Exactly.
Just so we can give a good example for everybody.
Everybody meets, they like, and then it's like you get that opportunity to talk to people, meet new people, right? Share the expertise, also hone your craft, right? And like really see like, well, which things are resonating with people and which things are not. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So let's see, there's another question here. A friend of mine who was a teacher has a rule of thumb of waiting up to 14 seconds after asking a student a question for a response. That seems like an eternity of time to me in this hyperactivity world.
I'm unclear as to what the question is there.
All right, well, then we can move on. Are there anybody? It's okay. We do a little suggestion here.
Matt, I'm just going to say that the concept of wait time, it is important. I don't know if 14 seconds, but sometimes many people have to process what they hear. And therefore, if you ask them a question and give them only 2 or 3 seconds, and then either ask them another question or move on, you've lost them. So that respect, people are, I think too often, people are afraid of silence, and silence, what is it? Silence is golden. So give them that respect. Ask them a question and wait. and watch their nonverbal language. How are they looking? Are they looking like they're thinking, or are they looking like they're just not even moving? And then you can judge it by that. So I don't think it's an unreasonable thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that, different people are going to process in different ways. So you do want to make sure that you're paying attention to that and giving people the time to answer, to think about something. You never want to feel barraged with questions. So I think that's a great point.
Any other questions, Peggy, that you saw?
I think that there was a comment. I think people really hung on to your idea of the importance of active listening. And I would say somebody said, where is it? And somebody said that they thought it was exhausting. I think that probably is exhausting if you practice it all the time, because
Peggy, that was me saying that. I was suggesting that active listening is a really difficult thing to do well until you get the art of it down. But really being
Correct.
that dialed into the dimensions of a conversation and what they're not saying, maybe why they're not saying that, that takes a lot of intellectual power that when I first started doing it, just drained me. But I got so much out of it, it was worth it.
Yeah, 100%.
And actually, I thought somebody wrote active listening is key. They were talking about Covey, and they said, they quoted him, they said, first become interested before being interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's basically what you were saying, Michael, as well. I think that, it was just another twist on that. And somebody else made another comment that I thought, I thought this was another interesting comment. Somebody said, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money.
Yep, exactly.
It's an old adage, but and then to your point, Michael, some comments were regarding get them to tell a story. And I think you're right. You were very much on target about when people talk and tell stories, then they are much more open to building that relationship and forming that trust.
Exactly.
That's it. That's what I saw, Matt.
Good, thank you. So recap a little bit for us, Michael. What are the key takeaways here?
Yeah. So the main I would say the biggest ones are, if you are stuck in that giver's fix, if you're experiencing asking anxiety, make sure that you are taking the time to educate your network about what it is that you need and what it is that you could use support with. Because without doing that, you are going to be kind of stuck sort of in that area. Now, the easiest way to get this all going is to follow that GATE strategy, where every day you make it a point to give, ask, thank, and experiment. So you really kind of like get into that flow, you sort of get into that rhythm. And then if the asking is a challenge for you and you're struggling with asking, start to experiment with dying and start to do, that aspect of, you have a direct ask, you have an indirect ask, you have a mutually beneficial ask, you're testing that extraordinary ask, you're doing those types of things, because the more that you do that experimentation and start testing those processes, the more rich those relationships are going to be and the more opportunities you're going to be able to create for yourself.
Yeah, and in the category of knowledge is power, I think it behooves all of us when we're reaching out to people to do our research, but it's also important for them to have done research about us so they know what to ask us for.
Exactly.
And it might not be something obvious, to your point earlier.
Yep, exactly.
There might be something in your background that I tell people when they're making a connection to send a resume, because it saves a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, but on that resume, maybe because you've sent it, they can see something in your interests that they can ask about.
Exactly. Connect with
So
you
they can
on.
solve the giver's fix.
Yes, exactly.
So anything else we missed out on?
And the only thing that I always kind of finish these conversations with is the fact that The keys to all the doors that you need open are in other people's pockets.
I like
And-
that.
You know, and when you get out there, you start having these conversations and you start letting people know what you're looking for, you're going to find those keys. So
Great. Any last questions? Because we've hit 5:03.
yeah.
I want to keep people. Anything else? Okay. So, Michael is very reachable. I believe I put his email address and LinkedIn profile. Please reach out to him. He has a wealth of knowledge and experience that he's more than happy to share with you. But of course, he will ask you for a favor in return. But it won't be as bad as the Godfather's one, right?
There you go. Perfect. Awesome.
Michael, you've been a delight.
Thank you.
I think I think Chat with Matt is a nice format, and it certainly beats death by PowerPoint.
Yes, indeed. Loving
All
it.
right. Well, thank
Awesome.
you, thank you, thank you, and
Thank you again.